Well, I think we don't need too much of an introduction. Paul's kind of done this. You mostly know where we are. We are hugely grateful to Paul and Arun and all of the team for allowing us to come here year after year, especially as we haven't been here for the last 2 or 3 years. It's my privilege, really, not to be an agency leader myself, but to be someone who runs a company, the Network One. If you don't know us, please find me in the coffee break and I will give you the full background story. But essentially, we are here to support the benefit of the independent sector within the public relations industry. I'm not going to say more than that because we've got such an interesting theme and really such a critical theme. I want to say a few words about our theme because it is absolutely germane to everything that we do and absolutely germane to our ability to succeed as a multicultural, multi-nation gathering and industry. And the theme is a single word, it's trust. And that's me. We can't use the word trust without thinking of the world's largest public relations agency. I believe certainly the world's largest independent, which is Edelman. They are almost synonymous with the word trust. When we put our panel together, we were talking to see who else talks about trust, and we were struggling. I think we thought Deloitte perhaps did a bit, but most people didn't. So this is not to criticize Edelman. In fact, it's in admiration of what Edelman have done over 22 years with the Trust Barometer. But it is to say it's not the entire full story, and maybe there are other aspects which are worth having a look at. This is what we saw in the 2022 survey. We'll talk about this in a little bit more depth when we get the panel up, but essentially it's a depressing picture. We see declining trust in governments, in democracies, in news media, in social media. We see business being more trusted, especially, interestingly, family and privately held businesses. But we see no institutions doing really well on key social concerns like pandemic response or climate change or discrimination and employment. And remember, this is done in more than 20 countries. It's a depressing picture. So let's just think about trust for a moment. When trust is lost, we see what happens. Those of you who've seen the news today know that we don't have either of those two people leading the UK anymore. And essentially nobody trusted them to run an economy. There was a story that, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng had to come back quite quickly on the last flight back, but he had to sit in first class because nobody would trust him with either business or economy. Thought you'd like that one. There we go. We see trust in, this is not a pop at Meta in particular, because actually the picture is true across social media. We see a declining value of the companies, and some of that must be to do with trust. You know, Snap is worse off than Meta and others too, so it's not a pop at Meta, but it is a phenomenon. On the other hand, when trust is won, I want to just talk about the positive side of this. When I started our business, we didn't have funding, we didn't have investors. We had two of us who'd worked in the agency world, we'd worked in multinational companies, and we set up the idea to go and talk to people around the world who ran independent firms of all disciplines, not only public relations, but also advertising and media, and increasingly a lot of social and digital media as well. We had to get people to trust us, and we had to work out who we could trust. I remember when I pitched up in Sao Paulo, even before then, you know, how do you know who to trust out of 24 million people? At the end of the day, the Brazilians told me it's really simple. If you can't work out who's trustworthy on a first meeting, you will not succeed in business in Latin America. Very true. So independent agencies, we have a discipline because we need to trust our clients, our business partners, and our suppliers. And we need them to trust us because we don't have the big stick of enormous funds. It's become a defining part of our culture, the ability to be trusted and to learn how to build trust. Culture is critical to all of what we're going to talk about. And usually, if you look at analyses of business cultures, they are either top-down or they're bottom up. And we could think of many examples, but essentially, I'm going to look at something which says that culture actually works sideways, works horizontally, because it's not just a question of do you trust the boss or do you trust your employees to do what you say if you are the boss. It's a question of how well all the people inside your organization trust each other, collaborate, help each other, and are not sitting in closed offices suspicion of each other. And a horizontal trust culture works through interdependence and collaboration. It is not a hierarchy, it's an ecosystem. And I was asked to talk about this to the Sustainable Brands Conference a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't really quite know how to do this, but I looked in the books, as you would, and two books I found which inspired me. One is called Entangled Life by a guy called Merlin Sheldrake, and the other is Finding the Mother Tree by Suzanne Simard. And Merlin writes about the ecosystem in a forest and how trees work with fungi and other parts of things that you don't really see under the ground. And without that ecosystem, forests die. This is a picture of him doing his PhD in Panama and discovering some of that. Suzanne is a lady in Canada from 6 generations of foresters, and she was basically hired to cut down forests and replant them with even more profitable trees, which she did. But she found that the forests that were simply cut down and trashed, when you planted your more profitable tree in the ground in a huge numbers, they didn't actually thrive because they lacked the ecosystem. And I just want to play one little video of Suzanne talking about what she learned from trees. Thank you.
This is a book about trees. It's a book about discovery about trees and mother trees. And this is a mother tree, a big old tree. And, you know, even more, it's about how these old trees are in a society. And there's so much like us. We live in societies. And in those societies, there's so many things going on. It's complex. Trees have complex lives. They know what their neighbors are doing. They communicate with them through these webs of fungal filaments that travel through the soil. They also communicate by sending off chemicals through the air. And so they're in this constant conversation, helping each other out. And that's the point I want to make with my book, is that we are so similar to forests. We can learn from the forest, that they're caring societies. They look after each other. They're about their relationships. Through these relationships, they're able to heal themselves and heal their families, heal their communities. It's just like we do. And when I wrote this book, I was going through personal healing journey myself. And I feel that what I learned from the trees helped me solve my own problems or deal with them. And I think that what these forests can teach us is how to heal our communities, but also how to treat them with more respect.
And that really is the point, because trust is founded on a mutual respect. That's what we're going to discuss. I'm just going to show one little example of one agency which I talked to recently, which totally amazed me. This is an advertising agency. It's an independent, it's in Chicago. It's called O'Keefe, Reinhardt and Paul. And they are the archetypal agency with the 3 middle-aged white guys. And to the enormous surprise of all of us, they won the global advertising account for Burger King. So I went to Chicago and asked them, so why did Burger King choose you? And I thought, oh, they're going to be retrenching back to, middle America values and all of that, but not at all. They did not. They said, no, no, no. The reason that we chose them was because they were the most diverse agency that had the most successful and demonstrably enthusiastic culture of people with all sorts of different color, different gender, different orientation, different background, different tastes in music, and different tastes in clothes. And when we toured the agency, we won the account on the agency tour because they could see that we were a diverse community that worked well together. And not only that, even more importantly, we enjoyed working and we enjoyed each other's diversity. And that made a big impression on me. And maybe that's a little bit of trust plus mutual respect, building a culture. But enough of just me talking. We're going to bring everybody on the stage. I'm going to just jump through to, we could do that too, that's another question, and introduce our panel. So please do join us on the stage. We have Farzana Badwal, who runs Curzon PR, which is a public affairs and more corporate PR firm in London. We have Joe Carr, who runs Hope and Glory, and Joe, you'll have seen at these conferences before, some of you. It's probably, arguably, one of the best consumer-oriented PR firms in the UK. We have Greg Monshine from Source Code, primarily a B2B and tech, but growing in other areas as well. And he comes from Miami, which is nothing to do with the current conversation, except that he wants the conference to go back there. And we have, last but not least, Josh Rosenberg, who has grown during the course of these conferences from being a kind of most promising newcomer to being a super successful 170-odd person agency in New York. So it can be done. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to start by asking you, if I may, we've seen the negativity in the Edelman report, the lack of trust in governments, the fact that apparently the Chinese trust their leadership more than any democratic nation. Do you feel that sense of lack of trust in society, in institutions? Greg, you're the nearest me. I'm going to ask you first.
Well, lucky me. I do, right? We've seen it with our entire teams. We've seen it in how we have to become more than just an employer. As an agency, we've had to become, talked about this, caregivers to a certain extent. So I think there's, seeing the silver lining, there's a lot of benefit that has come from this, from mental wellness programs to increased benefits to out-of-state healthcare services and the like. So, there's a lot of positive that has come to organizations and the employees of organizations that are willing to adapt.
That's a positive spin, but I want to get a sense of, is this negativity? Is the media making this up? Farzana, what do you see?
Well, actually quite interesting, because I think when you look at the media in certain countries, it's incredibly polarized alongside sort of different political lines. And then when you look at the social, because I think in the report they identified media and social media as being sort of two platforms that have suffered a particular loss of trust. And I think they also indicated that a lot of it was this sort of rush for clickbait. And what you see is the reality is a lot of media houses, they really do struggle in terms of their revenue, because a lot of the advertising budget has gone over to social media platforms. And so therefore, their need in order to, really bring in eyeballs results in a lot of, for instance, when you look at the difference between a lot of print media and the online equivalent often has a different heading. And the heading can sometimes be, quite sensational compared to the print version. And I've noticed this when I sort of read the Financial Times. And so people are beginning to pick up that it's about the attention economy, and there's sort of social media, and there is media articles that are screaming headlines, and there's a lot of noise out there, and I think what's happening is people understand that it's becoming increasingly divisive. I think the audience is far more educated in terms of the impact of social media and the impact upon media it has, and we're just going from one crisis to another. And I also think people are exhausted. I mean, after COVID, and then it's especially obviously from the UK, we've had sort of non-stop drama. People are utterly exhausted, and it's got to the point where even myself as a PR person, and my job is to read the news constantly, is I don't really want to read the news. I read the news with a heavy heart that I have to, as opposed to I enjoy it, because it's become so sensational and also very sort of divisive. And you've got now journalists who are actually, beginning to sort of espouse their political views, and that's quite unnerving for those of us who value independent journalism.
Thank you. Joe, I mean, again, from the UK, we talked a little bit earlier about the worries and dissatisfactions of people in the UK specifically, but around the world as well. The problems of affordability of life, the problems of inflation. You work with the consumer brands for the most part. Are you seeing that kind of misery as well? And do you think that the media is responsible for it?
Oh, wow. Quite a lot of misery, I think. But it's interesting, isn't it, with trust? I was thinking about this. When I grew up, my father used to say to me, never trust a man who says, trust me. Now, I never really took much advice from him on dating, which was probably a mistake. But that line has always stayed with me, that actually, when people ask you to trust them, you're normally quite suspicious, right? Yeah. And I think we've learned quite quickly, and particularly over the last 2 weeks in the UK with what's going on in government, that words mean nothing. And actually it's actions that are the things that are really going to make a difference. And I think, yes, we haven't had a great deal of good news over the last year or two in the UK, but I think the brands and our clients that have done well have where they've been able to lead from the front and actually do things. And then they get kind of a response from their public and the consumers on that front. And I think that's the area that I'm most interested in actually from that study is how, it's all very well saying that trust me, hey. But actually showing that you're worthy of trust and actually doing something that's trustworthy is the interesting bit.
Yeah, no, there was an interesting quote at Cannes from Jackie Cooper about the world is moving on from purpose to action or activism. And we saw some of that at Cannes when one of the WPP agencies was actually being awarded on stage for their work for Greenpeace. Meanwhile, Greenpeace was scaling the walls of the Palais, berating the communication industry for their support of oil companies. Josh, I want to ask you, how do you see our reputation as the PR industry? We were having a little conversation earlier about, well, actually, the PR industry invented fake news and disinformation. Are we just being holier than thou without justification? Or do we have a role that we have some hope of actually fulfilling, of improving the climate of trust in society?
Yeah, I think we are the ones that can do that, especially in communications. And I know this advice my mother gave me, not about dating, but it's really about, say what you mean and do what you say. And I feel like that action and that purpose is so important. It's almost like, how do you help a brand find their why to then be able to really deliver on that to the consumer each and every day? And I think that is important, and that's what we all really play a very strong role at the seats, where we all sit.
I mean, and anybody can please jump in on this and ask, but what are you advising your clients about building trust? We've had 8 years of, we must have more metrics, we must have more metrics. Farzana, you're almost saying we've got too much metrics at one point. How do you advise your clients if they want to build trust?
Well, first of all, I think it's just the pressure that a lot of media outlets have in terms of eyeballs. You also have with brand journalism. So a lot of journalists actually have left the media houses and gone into working in our sector under brand journalism. And what's, I think, quite important is not to sort of just chase metrics for the sake of metrics, to say, oh, look at my KPIs. It's, I've increased eyeballs by 30% on our sort of, company blog. It's really important to sort of, to not have this race to the bottom where it's all about eyeballs, but really understanding the sort of the nuance and making sure that brand journalism doesn't really take on the sort of the undermining effects of journalism in terms of clickbait, and those times when you look at an article and you read the title and you say, oh, that's really interesting, I really want to learn about it, and then your heart sinks when you open the article and it's got nothing to do with actually what you wanted to read. And really for brands for not to take down that route, and I think that's really important, because sometimes there's a trade-off between attention and alignment to your values, and what we also saw, I think, during Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement, is a lot of brands just jumping on bandwagons, and they didn't actually allocate resource. And you have to really marry action with intentionality, and action is also really based upon are you actually putting money where your mouth is, and allocating, and not just having a sort of a knee-jerk sort of astroturfing approach to, oh yes, we really believe in this, but how actually intrinsic is it to your values? And if you were to ask the whole ecosystem of stakeholders around your organization, will they also sing from the same hymn sheet as well? So I think that's quite critical.
Joe, you're working a lot with the consumer brands. I've often wondered, is there any meaning in a consumer brand as opposed to a corporate brand having a purpose? Wow. Mark Pritchard
that's really deep.
Mark Pritchard was asked this, and he goes, "What's your purpose?" And he said, "Well, I suppose our purpose is getting stuff cleaner." It was like he was like slightly taking the mickey out of the audience that can. But you have Ben and Jerry's is a B Corp in itself, but it's part of a much bigger organization. Is there a point in a consumer brand as opposed to a company having a purpose?
Yeah, I think all the evidence, particularly when you look at Gen Z and their purchasing habits, they are buying brands. They're buying the sneakers they're wearing, they're buying the clothes, often on Depop, or because it's been on a circular economy. They're buying things based on their values and who they trust. And that, I think, is separate to the corporate narrative. I think often, sometimes they're the same thing, sometimes the corporate and the consumer brand, but often, I think if you're working with a portfolio brand owner, if each brand will have a different reason for being, and I think it's really important. I think I wouldn't play it down. I'd play it up, if anything.
Okay, thank you.
Do you agree?
I do agree, 100%. And also then you look at even like a Patagonia, right? Like obviously they definitely stand for something. Even just think about what they just recently did. That almost combines like the consumer and the corporate purpose.
Yeah, but it is easier if you're both.
A consumer and a corporate brand, right? But I think to Joe's point, a consumer brand does also need to stand for something, because the way the consumer brand is communicating with their consumer most of the time is sort of in their phone. So, it's in the scroll. So how do you create that connection and actually stand for something and tell a story that means something that the audience on the other side will actually react to? And I think you need that core purpose in order to do so.
I want to pick up as well the question about purpose and action, and I want to ask you, Greg, because you have an initiative from the agency's point of view rather than your clients, which is I was quite impressed in when we talked about it in New York. You're allowed to blow your own trumpet on this.
This is the
please do.
Shameless plug part of this.
No, this is a really good initiative, and the fact that you had it is nice, but it's interesting for everybody.
So we as an agency were in early 2020. We were trying to think about what our thing was going to be, what we were going to do that was purposeful and meaningful to us. And we ended up not being able to work with a prospective client because of budget reasons. And we ended up being on a phone with a venture capital firm that only invests in POC and female-led businesses. So we pitched them the idea of providing some pro bono services to some of their portfolio companies. And it was one of those phone calls where you don't really know how they're going to respond, but they were like, great, let's do it. And we hung up and we're like, now we have to figure out how to do that. Long story short, we're now, it's 10 agencies. We've donated 1.3 million in pro bono services to 30 POC and female-led businesses. And it's been a real point of pride for us as an agency. And while, yes, it is a thing we're passionate about and something we're really proud of, but I truly believe the growth financially that Source Code has experienced over the last 5 years, it has a lot to do with being able to talk about that. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think doing good, if you do it well, legitimately impacts business.
But what I particularly like about that is it's not just your agency, is it? You've got
Yeah.
How many agencies are involved in that initiative now?
10, and we're looking for more if anybody's in the market for a unique pro bono initiative.
Good. Now that's what I call a plug. Thank you very much for that one.
Thank you.
We talked a lot because it is our business about how we influence people in the world outside our agencies. But of course, many of us are facing issues of talent recruitment, talent retention, mental health among the agencies. And you are mostly in this audience people who are running and managing agencies as well, and I'm sure you feel this too. What I'd really like to do is ask, and anybody can pitch in first on this time, is how you are building a culture or continuing a culture of trust within your agencies when your whole circumstance has changed radically. You know, not being in the office for probably best part of 2 years, figuring out hybrid, in office, out of office, free choice, mandatory days, and everything else. And I'd like to, not to mention onboarding new people. And I'd really like to ask, any one of you or all of you, what's worked for you in that, and what's still a challenge?
I can start. I think what's worked for us has really been, we've doubled down on internal communications, which we hadn't done as much pre-pandemic, and I think we've really increased our team there as well as our entire people and culture function. I also think we decided early on in the pandemic that we were not going to ever be a fully remote workforce, so we never hired outside of our 4 key cities. So we are back in the office 2 days a week, hybrid, and I think that in-person collaboration really has helped build trust and accountability, and also has driven more smiles than you would get on Zoom or on Slack. And I think that that's really been key to our mostly young creative workforce in terms of building a relationship with each other, but also with their clients. So I think those are some of the things that have worked really well for us.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think I'm sure it's true of lots of people here that the last 2 years I've spent most of my time, I feel like being head of internal comms. Whether it was the pandemic, then it was the war in Ukraine, it's been the cost of living. The team have looked to us more and more often for reassurance, for guidance, for help, quite frankly, as to how they're going to navigate this world. So I think our internal comms function, which is mainly me, has skyrocketed up. And for us, we're in all together 3 days a week. We've mandated that people come in on a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and that has really worked in terms of cementing our culture. We've always had a very strong culture anyway, but I think the teams really got a lot out of being together, and actually have been perhaps less stressed because of being together. I think when you're remote, like we have been for the last 2.5 years, if you've got a problem and you're grappling with it, it might be a client issue, it might be a member of your team with an issue, it sits with you and you're on your own. You're in the office with 90 or 100 other people. You can amble over to somebody else's desk. You feel like the problem is shared. And certainly for me, I'm a lot happier in the office. And I think maybe that's my age, maybe I'm of that generation, but I think that's also true of the 22-year-old, 23-year-olds that are also in the office with us, that they're learning, they're spending more time, they're understanding how we work as an organization, and I think FaceTime allows them, to trust me and the rest of the board more.
Yeah. We heard a lot about, last year about the Great Resignation and the difficulty of attracting talent. Sounds like a lovely place, Jay, but what are the challenges that you're facing in getting people to join?
Actually, we've always had a relatively low churn, which has been quite good. So we haven't seen the Great Resignation in the way that I think we were all waiting for and anticipating. I think the challenge is, maybe I'd be interested to know if other people are finding this as well, is a generational challenge. I think Gen Z have potentially a different view as to what they want out of work. And I think trying to get that balance between PR being a craft and a skill that you actually have to put some time into, that can be quite challenging, because I think there's a bit of an expectation, perhaps that's grown throughout the pandemic, of, well, I work 9 to 5, and I'm all about work-life balance, and it's really important to have a life. Let's not go back to the 1980s and the 1990s when we were kind of chained to our desk. But at the same time, I think there's an expectation you're going to go really quickly, your career, without having perhaps put the time at the wheel to learn the craft. And I think that's challenging for people running agencies, trying to find really skilled people who are happy to put the hours in. And I don't mean long hours, but I mean, right now there's people that we're meeting who've got 4 or 5 months experience and who are wanting to be an account manager. Yeah, well, that's, you need like 3 years experience to be looking at that.
So yeah, keep them realistic.
Oh, sorry. I'm glad I'm not alone. Sorry.
There's not, obviously there's not a single answer to this. And I know that both Farzana and Greg have a slightly different kind of approach, or you have until now, about return to the office.
Yeah.
Tell us about what you're doing on that at the moment and how you feel that's working and what you've learned.
Yeah. Shall I go?
Yeah.
Go on, Greg, you can be first.
All
I'll
right.
be polite.
So we're still 100% remote. It depends on the day. We go back and forth, and we've just kind of decided we're kicking the can down the road with regards to making the decision. For us, I look at Josh as a guidepost, right? Like, he's done some amazing things with getting. I was convinced
Thank you, Greg.
we mandated people, we would lose half our staff. He's convinced me that's probably not the case. So we're trying to learn from all of you, right? Like, who's doing what and what's working, and then adapt. We'll probably make a decision within the next probably 4 or 5 months.
Sounds like you're leaning towards you might go back.
In a hybrid way, in all likelihood.
Yeah. Farzana?
A bit difficult for us because we have colleagues who are in Nigeria, in India, in Argentina. But what I do find is those of us colleagues who meet up, who are sort of live in and around London, we tend to work more sort of intuitively together, and there's less misunderstandings. And I'm very pro-remote, but I do see the bad side. And what I see is sort of spike in anxiety. And I also see a loss of connection, and also a very transactional approach to looking to sort of career. So it's very sort of, this company is going to pay me X amount of more, and actually, it's very easy for me to shift from one company to another. So there's less sort of relational capital that you can build when you have remote teams. And so we're trying to counter that by having everybody sort of fly in, once a year for a week, and the focus is not to do work, but more to build connection, and to have fun, and to sort of have those, because, there's only so much fun you can have with Zoom. And also, we
don't like Zoom happy hours.
And the issue, I think, also with Zoom is when you get on a call, your first thing is like, how could you make the Zoom call finish quick? And you just have this agenda, and all of a sudden everyone's super efficient with agendas, which they never really are in, when we do our sort of real in-person meetings, because everyone just wants to get the Zoom call done and dusted and out. So it's super efficient in terms of, in terms of meeting time, but it isn't in terms of building connection and trust. And that perhaps, and I'd love to see the Edelman report, if it talks about actually trust with employers for remote teams versus non-remote teams across the different generations. I mean, I'd love to see a little bit more sort of texture to the reporting, because we are living in different times, and we're trying to grapple to find out, is it in person, is it hybrid, is it remote, and the data would really help to guide us as well.
You were saying something really interesting when we were having the discussion this morning about, there's a certain way that a company or an agency behaves in the UK or the US or the Western world. Whereas in many different developing markets, and you work across multiple of those markets, there's a sort of different view of the role of an agency and the agency leadership in management. I'd just say, if you'd like to say a little about that, it's quite interesting for us to think there's not only our way of doing things.
So most of my work tends to be emerging markets and frontier markets. And what I noticed from working in the organizations there, I noticed that, the culture is almost quite paternalistic. And sometimes they use terminology in their internal comms like, we are a family. And I would slightly cringe at that. I was like, you're not a family. You don't fire your family. I mean, some people do. So I would sort of feel really uncomfortable uncomfortable when I would sort of, you know, and the culture was very, very sort of, you know, if somebody had a personal problem or they couldn't afford a funeral of you know, of an uncle or a father, they would come to their boss. So they would bring in a lot of their personal issues, because what I felt was actually the ecosystem that they were living in was because there was a sort of a lack of trust, quite rightly so in some situations, with government, and perhaps what we're seeing is a heavily is sort of, you know, what was in the emerging markets where people trust their companies more than the wider ecosystem, because you know, the governments have varying levels of competence and ability to deliver in the areas that they say they will. What we're seeing in the West is perhaps the more reliance upon the employers, based upon the last report, is probably because actually, I mean, in the UK alone, you can't even see your doctor. They don't even want to see you face to face. You're lucky to get a telephone meeting. You know, I had some issue with my shoulder. They've given me an appointment in February. So that's just, you know, dealing with doctors. We've got, you know, stories of people coming to the employers before they go to their own doctors when they have issues. So perhaps what's happening is that people in the West are beginning to understand that there's a lack of competence in, you know, in the health system, in government, in media, and they're turning more and more towards their employers.
Yeah.
And, you know, and the question is, at what point does it end? And so during COVID, employers really stepped up with internal communications, they went the extra mile. But what is going to happen in the next 5-10 years? At what point, you know, are employers responsible for the happiness of their employees, to the extent where perhaps what they were looking for originally, previously in the community or in government, they're looking for that within their employers? So what are we morphing into?
I think that's a really interesting area, because I think we're all probably quite high empathy people. I think you only work in the communications business normally if you've got quite high empathy. And as a result, I think we probably run organizations where, you know, people like coming to work. We do worry about their happiness. We want them to be happy. But it's about being high support, but I think also high challenge. And I think we've got to make sure that we keep the work centered to what we do, because we could have a team of very, very happy people, but if the work is a bit mediocre, then the clients don't stay and then they leave. So I think for me, it's trying to strike that balance between being really supportive, but having a focus on the work, challenging our colleagues when it's not right, and putting that front and center. And I think there's a danger, we talk about it as warm bath, cold shower, that if it's a very warm bath, everybody's really happy and then kind of can imagine it. And then every now and again, you have to give some negative feedback and it feels like a cold shower. And I think we've got to find a middle ground. That's the thing that's keeping me awake at night. How do I find that middle ground between warm bath, cold shower?
I think also, just to build on that, I feel like the duty of care for all of us as leaders is so important, but also it needs to go back to like, what is the business to your point? And I think we've done a lot of work in trying to think about, you know, we're a creative agency, how do all the programs that we do to help support our team help to inspire them or sort of drive their creativity? So we created like a program called, it was originally during the pandemic, Fresh Thinking Wednesdays, which is like no meetings Wednesday morning. We've now continued that basically summer Fridays, but all throughout the year where it's like Fresh Thinking Fridays. And we found that that has really helped, you know, in terms of some of the burnout, not all of it, but also goes back to sort of what is our core tenet, which is, you know, how do we stay inspired and curious and, you know, keep our brains fresh.
Greg, what do you do to make people enjoy working with source code?
So I think for us, it comes down to just being honest about the state of the world and the business and what we're doing. You know, there are some of these similar things. We launched something called Source Code Strong, which is a mental wellness program. We've given people summer Fridays all year round. We've done all of these things. But I think we've tried to limit the coddling, right? And give people the truth about what's going on, right? When business is good, we talk about it. When business is bad, we talk about it. We have bi-weekly meetings where we run through the financials, where we run through how the business is going, what's working, what's not, and where we should be going. And I think, you know, being open and honest about our anxiety as leaders, our nerves with regard to what's going to happen or what's not going to happen, I think engenders trust, right? Like there's this delicate balance between inspiring, keeping people confident, but then also being open and honest and realistic about what's really happening. And I think people respond favorably to understanding what's really going on in the business.
Yeah, I think transparency is really key. I think the other bit, though, is we're all encouraged, aren't we, to be more vulnerable. Show your vulnerability, we're often told. And I think I guess it's hard to show your vulnerability, but at the same time, look like you're in charge, because I think our teams want us to have the answers. They want us to have a view on the cost of living crisis, to have some ways to help them. And I think on the one hand, we're all a bit nervous because we don't know the answers. We don't know what's going to happen next. So you want to show a bit of that, but at the same time, there's a kind of, let's be calm, let's reassure, let's make sure people know that we've got their back.
Is anyone in the audience got a challenge to any of that, or an experience that you found in creating a culture and trust inside your agency you'd like to share? Please, at the back, go. Sorry, Michael, just a microphone is just coming behind you. 1 sec.
Thank you. Hello. A question for Josh, and that we are a New York City-based firm also, and we are struggling with using the word mandate for people to come back to the office. We've heard every excuse from, I'm more efficient at home, the subways are not safe, crime in the city, to the COVID 20-pound gain. I don't have the right clothes anymore. What has been the reaction to the...
That's so funny. We've heard all of those. So we work with Walmart, so we gave everyone a $200 stipend so they can fit into new pants from Walmart. We also, for some people, we do help support them with Uber if, they do need to get back into the office. Our team is, much smaller, and I think we try to be as accommodating as we can, but a lot of what we do too is part of the job is going to real life events and staffing those for clients, and you can't actually do that from home. So I think in that sense we've brought most of the people back. We still have some, we're not taking attendance, so we still have people that might not be following the 2-day-a-week rule, but I would say for the great majority they are in person in all of our cities. And
has been any effect on turnover?
Potentially, but I would argue that it probably wasn't the right person for day one. I don't think we haven't lost any, high performer due to coming back into the office. We also were very clear from the beginning that, we didn't know where the pandemic was going to go, but that we would always be a team that we do better together than we do remotely. So that sort of was always clear from any hire that we made throughout the last 3 years.
Thank you. Anyone else? Another question, observation? Yes, please, lady, just here. You've got the microphone, so.
I think just
that way.
Put it.
Hi, I'm Valerie Chan. I run Platform PR, and we're a PR firm that works with the legal, regulatory, and compliance space. And so I have a question about transparency. So in 2020, I worked to make sure that all our employees had their bonuses and that sort of a thing. I was very transparent with the firm. In 2021, one of my managing directors, or the managing director, decided to go to a larger firm and disregarded our non-compete and started trying to poach clients and staff. We were, at the time, a 10-person company. We are now 15, but I've had to literally rebuild the internal team, I wouldn't say from scratch, but I would say 80% are all new. We've been able to have healthy growth during this time, even though, it's been challenging with the Great Resignation. And so going back to the question about transparency, at what point is transparency way too much? And then, and at what point do you trust again?
Too much transparency. Has anybody had an experience of that? Or not necessarily your own, but seen it in clients as well? First
of all, there's an excellent law firm in the in the crowd who might be able to help you out better than I would on some of this. Look, we stop short of anything that's not legal for us to share, right? We'll tell people if we're having employment challenges, if we've had people leave the company, people pretty if it's abrupt, they know what happened, and if it's not, they know. I think it's part of the business, right? And I think if we don't let people understand the challenges we have as leaders, they'll never become leaders, and they're probably not the right person, to Josh's point, for your business anyway. So I would argue that if, depending upon how communicative you are during this time,
I was pretty communicative, and I think that was the thing where I was just like, whoa, maybe I shared way too much, you know, and I could have done better. You know, I'm Asian American, so I'm of course like beating myself up, but at the same time, like there's a part where, going back to the transparency, now with this new staff, I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, especially since we've been really good retaining the clients that we've had, and had to, you know, actually had to talk to the clients about it, especially when this person tried poaching our clients, right? And it turned out to be a legal issue, just as an FYI, as you probably know. But it's just one of those things now where I, as a business leader, am having a very challenged, like, I'm grappling with it, because there's a part where I don't even want to share transparency. I don't want to share growth. I don't want to share client budgets, you know, in the point where it might hurt me, so.
But I think, I mean, I completely get where you're coming from. But I think if you want to grow your firm, you do need to kind of probably expand that circle of trust. And as hard as that is, because you've obviously been bitten, to take other people on that journey with you will be really key, because otherwise you can't hold it all yourself. I think even for your own sanity, right? To being able to share and tell the people that you work alongside what's going on. We also have a thing actually where we talk about, we praise in public, but we critique in private. So perhaps we overemphasize the good news, but if there is something going a little bit awry with somebody, we'll try and keep that kind of out of the public domain, at least for the majority of the time. But people may jump to their own conclusions, don't they? Right. If people leave.
I have a feeling we could go and talk about this for a lot longer. Can I take one more question?
Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry for what happened to you. That is shit. My name's Rich. I'm from CC Group. When it comes to building trust within an agency, how far is too far? So we've had lots of great conversations and done some really great work around mental health, around diversity and inclusion, around cost of living crisis. And then last week, we addressed the issue of menopause and female sexual health.
Well done, Rich.
Holy crap. I learned a lot about the menopause from a podcast that Joe was on last year. It was a really challenging issue. There was lots of concern amongst the young women in our organisation ahead of time. It went fine, but question for you, in your opinion, is there a too far?
Wow. I mean, obviously, I'm a great oversharer, so I'm maybe not the right person to answer this question, because I do think, you know, there's a lot going on in people's lives, and we ask our people to bring their best selves to work. And I think there needs to be an ability to talk about the things that are going on outside of your client work, and, you know, that might be affecting how you're feeling. And menopause is a great example of that. Fertility is another one that we've addressed with our team members. So I'd like to think that there aren't that many conversations that should be off limit, but I think perhaps underlying that question, Richard, is where do we stop being parents? There are times when I'm thinking, look, you're grown-ups, right? I can't run your lives for you, and that's the bit that is interesting, because you can take, you want to share knowledge. I think knowledge is really important, but you can't make people make, you know, I think you have to leave a certain amount for people to be curious about and go and find out on their own time, or in their own time. I don't know, that probably didn't really answer your question, but I've...
Because I don't know what it would be, but that was a difficult one.
Yeah, but I'm glad you're talking about the menopause. That's really good. Do you want to know I'm talking to you?
That's when I call in my head of people and culture for help and advice.
I think we're going to make ourselves unpopular if we go on further, because we are past our time. But what I'd just say is, you know, talking to people about why would you go back to an in-person conference. It's all about having discussions that you wouldn't have on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
And you know, each of the people on this panel is here for the rest of the 2 days. Take the opportunity, talk to them, talk to each other. This is what this is all about. And you know, when we go forward and have conferences, which we also do, it's not going to be just about the star speakers, although, yeah, we are looking forward to some of the speakers that Paul and Arun have arranged for the next couple of days. But it's about sharing experiences and learning from each other, because we are, all of us, a small group in a massive, great world with enormous challenges. So thank you very much to our panel for sharing, some personal moments and some more principled observations as well. Thank you to Greg, Fazana, Joe, and Josh.
Thank you.